Honorable Sénateur,
Honorable Senators, I see that we have quorum, and I declare the meeting in session.
welcome all of the senators as well as the viewers across the country who are watching us on sencanada.ca. Mon nom, Percy Mockler.
My name is Percy Mockler, Senator from New Brunswick and Chair of the Senate Committee on National Finance. I would like now to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting from my left, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, bienvenue.
Chairman, welcome. Éric Forêt from Quebec. Clément Gignac, Quebec.
Bonjour, bienvenue. Sénateur Tony Lafreda.
Tony Lafreda, Senator from Montreal.
Judy White, Senator, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Bonjour, je suis Paul Wu du Colombie.
Paul Wu, Senator from British Columbia.
Unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
Larry Smith, Quebec.
Elizabeth Marshall, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Jean-Guy Dagenet, Québec.
Jean-Guy Dagenet, Quebec.
Senators, merci. Honorable Senators, today we begin our study of Bill 2, S-233, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income, which was referred by the Senate of Canada to this committee on April 18, 2023, with an order of reference, and we also have sitting at our table the sponsor, Senator Pate. We have the pleasure today, Honorable Senators, of welcoming Monsieur Yves Giroux, Parliamentary Budget Officer. Monsieur Giroux est accompagné.
Mr. Giroux is accompanied by Mr. Nasreddin Aminar. Have I pronounced your name correctly, sir? Yes? Thank you.
For accepting our invitation to appear in front of the Finance Committee. That said, it's always very enlightening, Monsieur Giroux, to have you and have your comments and your testimonies to help Canadians understand the process of budgets, and also to, we have a common denominator, which is transparency, accountability, predictability. And that said, I have been informed that you have comments to share with the committee on this. Je vous cède la parole.
You have the floor, Mr. Giroux. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you very much for having invited us to appear before you to deal with S-233, an act to deal with a framework for a guaranteed basic livable income, the GLBI. I have Nasrid Jamar with me, who is an analyst who has dealt with this extensively. First of all, let me give you some context. In November 2017, with respect to a study on poverty in Canada, our office published a paper dealing with certain initiatives by the government, some 75 initiatives that would look at poverty in Canada. It also represented an overall amount of some $67 billion to function and fund programs, including the GLBI, including the Canada Child Benefit and others. Our conclusion was that these programs that were involved in this study did not serve the same population and did not have the same objectives or goals. They were set out to deal with a variety of specific goals. I will now continue in English.
Ontario launched a basic income pilot project in several areas, including Hamilton and Thunder Bay. In April 2018, we released our first estimate of the cost of establishing a national guaranteed basic income based on the Ontario model. For the fiscal year 2018-19, we estimated this gross cost at $76 billion, an amount that would rise to $79.5 billion in 22-23. After subtracting federal aid already provided to low-income individuals, we assessed the net cost of establishing a national basic guaranteed income at $44 billion. In July 2020, we responded to a request from your colleague, Senator Wu, to re-estimate the cost post-COVID-19 of a GBI program using the parameters of the Basic Income Pilot Project established in Ontario. This request came after the introduction of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which propelled the universal basic income debate into the spotlight. The PBO presented 3 estimates based on scenarios that gradually phase out the benefit by 50 cents, 25 cents, and 15 cents for every dollar of employment income. This report also provided the provincial breakdown of the GBI cost. At that time, we estimated a gross total cost of between $47.5 billion and $98.1 billion based on the 3 scenarios for the 6-month period from October 2020 to March 2021. As directed by Senator Wu, the PBO also prepared a list of federal and provincial programs whose elimination could fund the GBI. To complete the analysis, several parliamentarians asked us to assess the effect of such a government transfer program on income distribution and poverty rates, measure its budgetary impact, and estimate the behavioral impact of its implementation. Another report in April 2021 indicated that the GBI would have a progressive effect on household disposable income and could reduce poverty rates by nearly half, according to the Market Basket Measure, MBM. We estimated that the annual cost of a GBI would increase from $85 billion in 21-22 to $93 billion in 2025-26. These figures reflect the additional disability benefit payments and behavioral impact. On that being said, we'd be pleased to respond to any question you may have regarding our work on a guaranteed basic income or other PBO work. Merci.
Merci, Mr. Giroux.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giroux.
We'll now proceed to questions and to share with you a maximum of 5 minutes each because we have only one round for the first hour. That said, I will now recognize immediately Senator Marshall pour être suivi du sénateur Forest.
Followed by Senator Faure.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, for being here. I was looking at your April 2021 report and looking at the costs of the program, and I know that there's been several pilots introduced in Canada, but it seems like government backs away from it for whatever reason. And you just released your fiscal update on Friday, which indicated that the government is facing some severe fiscal challenges. So there is a cost associated with this program, and I think your number in your report in 2021 for this year would have been about just over $80 billion. So do you have any comments, and this is something I got from your report, would you have any comments on whether the government can afford to implement this program? And the other area I'd like for you to address is I see from your report that part of it would be funded by taxpayers not being able to claim the basic exemption. So I'd like your comments on whether the government could afford the program on its own or whether Canadians would be willing to accept the higher levels of taxation that would be required to fund it.
So that's probably the biggest question when considering a guaranteed basic income. In the summer, we released a report, our fiscal sustainability report, which indicated that the government could either increase spending or reduce taxes or a combination of both to the tune of about 1.7, 1.8% of GDP, so about $40 billion, and still be fiscally sustainable. So that suggests that a guaranteed basic income would have to replace some of the existing programs, including some of the existing tax preferences, as you mentioned. So in that vein, one would have to look at whether a guaranteed basic income could be fully or at least partially funded by reducing the basic personal amount, social assistance at the provincial level, and other tax credits such as the GST credit, to determine whether it would be sustainable or affordable without risking or jeopardizing the fiscal sustainability of the federal government. But as others have mentioned before, there are many, many parameters to take into account in designing a GBI. So it would certainly be possible to design a GBI that would be less expensive. What we costed was one with a series of assumptions and parameters. But as it is, it would only be sustainable if a series of programs and tax preferences were to be eliminated.
Okay, so you've also done work, I mean, we're talking about the federal government now, but you've also done work on the fiscal sustainability of the various provinces. And implicit in your report is that the provincial governments would also have to forego tax revenues, which is very significant. So how receptive do you think the provincial governments would be to foregoing some of these provincial revenues, tax revenues?
Well, it would depend on the design of such a guaranteed basic income. For example, if the federal government was to take most of the costs, I think provinces could be willing to jump or to accept a guaranteed basic income, as it would very likely negate the need for most of the social assistance expenditures at the provincial level, and it would also make less necessary a series of provincial tax credits. But a guaranteed basic income would require extensive negotiations with provinces and
Do I have time
territories.
for one more question?
You have 40 seconds.
40 seconds,
left.
okay. Could you, I know in the 2021 report, the summary of Figure 1, you're showing first, second, third, fourth, and fifth quintile, and you're showing average numbers. Could we get a frame? It's an average number, but an average, I mean, something would be low and something could be very high. Could we get the range for each of those quintiles?
Actually, it's possible.
And just
yes.
send it to the clerk?
Yeah.
Okay, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Marshall. Sénateur Forêt d'être suivi du...
Senator Faure, followed by Senator Gignac, followed by Senator Smith, and then Senator Pate. Senator Faure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, sir, for being with us today. It's a very important issue, particularly all the analyses and studies that you have been doing over the years. My first question is this. You say that it could be a cost, zero cost, if there are certain changes that are made. But we know that there are 10% of Canadians that don't file their income tax. Some voluntarily to escape any type of income tax, but others for other reasons. Do you estimate that the cost of the program would take into account this population? It's very difficult to take into account people who don't fill out their income tax form if they don't file. We make our models based on models that are related to income tax filings. So it is quite clear that the instance that you have cited would escape the modeling if they don't year after year fill out their income tax forms. In part, it tries to take into account the part of the population that doesn't file, but it's not a perfect or complete adjustment and compensation. But there are not quite a number of citizens that find themselves in that situation. Another question. If you want to make this cost neutral, there are programs that have an impact, and could you? And today there are many programs that are being hard hit by inflation. Can you tell us if you've measured that? We have looked at it by quintile, income quintile, the elimination of certain tax credits, the basic amount, the amount for workers, There's a whole series there that is in the Annex A of the 2021 report. You see that in third, fourth, and fifth quintiles. These are people that would experience a net drop in their available income if these tax credits were eliminated or if these benefits were eliminated. So 60% of the population would be the losers, 40% of the population would be the winners in this situation. That, if you want to be cost neutral, there have to be some losers, and the 60% of the higher income, it would reflect a good part of the class, the upper class in our modeling. Do I have time? Yes. Well, this type of programming should provide for incentives to have people go to work. A lot of people aren't motivated to work. And yet there are employers who are desperately seeking employees. Are you able to measure the effect of employment incentives? And can you explain your conclusions? The literature explains the measurement of the rates. There are marginal rates and the rates of reduction for certain benefits that people are facing in certain segments of the population. So basing ourselves on the literature and given the experience that we've had in the past, we've reached the conclusion that would be a drop of about 1.5% in terms of the work that would be done, and also seen in the light of the benefits that exist in that specific segment. Senator Gignac, followed by Senator Smith. Senator Gignac. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witness for being with us today. Quebec is recognized as being quite progressive and probably very egalitarian. The OECD has talked about its coefficient of genius, closer to Sweden, Finland, and so on. Quebec has set up a committee of experts that would look at the possibility of a guaranteed minimum income, and the conclusion was the following, and I quote, the committee has reached the following conclusion, that such a guaranteed basic income would have great difficulty being socially accepted. If Quebec analyzed it, and our experts suggest that that would be the case, have you looked at that and have you taken that into account? The committee of experts indicated that this would represent a disincentive for work, which is not surprising given the estimates that have been made, because, I mean, we have found the same thing, that it could constitute a disincentive for work. There is the issue of social acceptability. It refers probably to the fact that people would think that people were being paid to do nothing with this basic guaranteed income. And they would have money being guaranteed, but they wouldn't be working. And that there is also a social security that exists for some segments of the population and other programs. I can't make any comment on that, but I think that my colleague, Mr. Nassir, is going to make a comment. Just this, I would like to say, Senator Faure, that we have estimated the effect that this would have on participation in the workforce. But we look at the parameters that we used, and the most recent reports are dated 2021, and since that time there have been economic changes because of inflation and structural changes. So you look at the analysis of a guaranteed basic income, you have to also look at the participation in the workforce. That in itself is important. Work has to be done on that. The data that we used and they used are data that come from other political administrations, not ours. Chair, this comes back to the discussion that I've had with Senator Marshall. We all agree with Senator Pate that the goal is to reduce poverty. There's no doubt about that. And we're speaking here about a guaranteed basic income, but there are other approaches where you can target other ways of reducing poverty. My question is this. You said in your report on fiscal viability, it would cost about some 40 to $50 billion. Things have changed since then, but the hypothesis that was put out at the time, we've had changes, for example, Medicare changes. Would Canada be able to take a targeted approach? Would that be better, like Quebec indicated? Well, you have public finance, other programs. You have pharmacare. You have other, Medicare. Choices would have to be made if there were a guaranteed basic income. You have to look at the overall of all these programs of the tax income. Do you make choices to reduce some of the programs to ensure the other program? We can't do everything. We can't do all those programs without increasing taxes. And also, we have to ensure financial viability. Thank you.
Followed by Senator Pate and then Senator Wu. Senator Smith, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Giroux. Thanks for being with us this morning.
People 17 years of age and up with a guaranteed basic income would have major behavioral reactions. In your 2020 report on this subject, you didn't really take these potential behavioral responses into consideration when estimating the cost of the GBI program. Just wondered if you could talk about why you didn't include the potential implications of behavioral responses of the program.
So the first reports, we didn't take that into account because there was not that much information available at that time and not that much time to take that into consideration. We were asked to estimate the cost, and that's why we did take these aspects into consideration in our 2021 report, where we had a bit more time and we had more time to look at academic literature that considered the incentive and disincentives aspects of a guaranteed basic income. But as Nasreddin indicated earlier, that was in 2021, and things have changed. The economic fabric has changed a bit, and the labor markets have changed. So updating these studies now could lead to slightly different numbers in terms of the disincentives to work. Nasreddin?
Yeah, and just to add to that, the first report when we did that, like the request was about the gross cost of the basic income. So, and to evaluate the behavioral income, we need really to identify the list of programs that will be replaced by the GBI, and recalculate the marginal effective tax rate. Based on that, we will calculate the behavioral impact. And the first report, we don't do that. Just we estimate the gross cost. We don't identify any programs, and we don't estimate the behavioral income impact. After that, because of the second report, after the request of Senator Wu, when he asked for the costing of basic income during the COVID, and the possible program that could be replaced to fund the basic income, that helped us later to to evaluate the behavior impact of the GBI.
Can I ask one more question? Many COVID-19 support programs like the CERB included eligibility criteria such as having had filed taxes in previous years. Most of these programs did not have built-in anti-fraud mechanisms in the front end. As a result, hundreds of millions of dollars in pandemic support ended up in the wrong hands. Just wondering if any of the GBI programs you've reviewed, have you evaluated the risk of fraud or any additional risks?
Well, I think CERB is probably not the best comparator because there was an urgency, a sense of urgency to send the money as quickly as possible, and we were told the checks and balances will be done later, and we can debate whether that was sufficient or not. I would say not. But for a GBI, I don't think there would be the same sense of urgency, and I think the government could introduce guardrails and verification measures that would be a bit more rigorous than the virtual non-existence of these guardrails for
Suggested
CERB.
guardrails that you would put forward at this time?
I think basing that on the tax system would probably be a good approach, but it's up to the government decision when it comes to design.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Pate, the sponsor of the bill, to be followed by Senator Hu.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much to the witnesses for being here and for your work. I just want to clarify, I think you've been clear that you estimated gross costs and you just mentioned your last answer is that you would have to look for actual net costs. You would have to look at what the offsets would be, and that's clearly part of what you've indicated. As well, this whole issue of the cost savings, one of the issues that was raised, and I understand as the parliamentary budget officer, you can comment on the impact of policy, but not necessarily recommend to us the policy. So, but when you were looking at the costing, the cost of the various reports you did you experiment at all with different definitions of the benefit unit at all? And so, beyond the individual or the nuclear family, did you estimate the cost of the impact, for instance, of poverty reduction if the census family is used as a result? So getting at the question that Senator Smith just asked, the census family could include adult children living with their parents and therefore allow for some offset. So some economists have suggested that including adult children living with their parents as part of the same family could lead to up to a 40% reduction in net costs with virtually the same impact on poverty reduction. Would you have any reason to question that conclusion?
We looked at the individual and the family as we normally consider a family. So we didn't look at the various possible permutations, but based on what you said, I have no reason to believe these numbers would not be accurate. If you included, for example, adult children, which is the case in my household, I have one such adult children still studying. So it could well lead to different, slightly or significantly different numbers.
So it could be one of the guardrails you mentioned that,
yes,
for instance, didn't exist with CERB. That
could well be.
Led to some of the, I would say, perpetuation of some of the myths and stereotypes about freeloading adult children.
Yes, there are almost an infinite number of permutations when designing such a program. Clawback rates, administration, design issues, definition of family unit, individuals versus census or household. So yes, many possible design issues. Questions?
Do I still have time? Okay.
2 minutes.
When you costed in the 2021 report, net costs were, in the end, you said about $3 billion when you took into a number of the permutations. I know you mentioned that in your testimony this morning it was more like $44 billion, but if you looked at a number of the programs that currently exist, it brought it down significantly. And I understand that that you weren't able to look at the downstream costs in other areas. So, for instance, the criminal legal system, the shelter system, healthcare system. And I'm just curious whether you could clarify whether the PBO has costed such downstream cost savings in other in other studies? And if not, could you please explain why not and clarify for the committee whether you believe that there could be such savings and how we might best encourage them to be calculated?
That's a question that comes back very often when we do our reports. Have you considered the savings or the downstream impacts? And the answer is usually we don't do that because we're a budget office, so we're asked to cost the cost of something or the revenues generated by something rather than the downstream impact. And on a program such as the Guaranteed Basic Income, it's quite clear that there would certainly be impacts on those who would receive a bona fide income, especially those at the lower end. We have not estimated the benefits for these people, the beneficiary populations as to, for example, better health outcomes or better mental health outcomes or better increased affordability of housing for them. So it's something we have not done for lack of resources and time as well.
Okay.
You have 45 seconds.
Okay. So in terms of using best available data, certainly UBC, University of Saskatchewan, others, the Basic Income Network of Canada have looked at a number of different models. Would it surprise you to hear that they've estimated savings from those systems, the health, criminal, legal, and other systems, in the order of $26 billion? And so that would be a return of $1.06 for every dollar spent on a guaranteed livable basic income.
It's quite possible. That's not something that sounds like in or out of whack or incoherent with what we've seen.
Thank you very much.
Senator Wu, to be followed by Senator Lofreda. Senator Wu, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. Just a few questions on the estimates that you've produced. As I recall, you didn't actually eliminate all of the basic income, basic amount in the calculation of the net cost. So that has been preserved so that if there were a further reduction or reduction in the basic amount, the cost savings or the net cost would be even less. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Secondly, I believe also you did not eliminate the disability amount so that, again, that is preserved for people who are concerned, genuinely and rightfully concerned about the special needs of the disabled. That has been protected in the estimates that you produce. Is that correct as well?
I think so. There are some supplements, some more targeted tax preferences or tax credits that have been eliminated.
Okay.
And regarding the basic amounts, what we did is we eliminate the total of federal part, but part of the provincial basic amounts.
Okay. The distributional effect of the basic income calculation, you've mentioned already the burden, so to speak, rests mostly with I think it's the third and fourth quintile mostly. The fifth quintile, surprisingly, doesn't get affected that much. But the average impact on the third and the fourth quintile, I believe, is only 2% of the income. Is that correct to say? Okay.
On average, yes.
So it's a small amount of redistribution where people who are middle and upper income essentially share the largesse to bring about a large reduction in poverty and, I would say, in income security as well. Let me ask you then about the behavioral aspects, and you've looked at the literature on the effect of a basic income on work effort. Do you look at short-term as well as longer-term elasticities, if I can put it that way? Or is there any good information on whether in the longer run these kinds of cash transfers reduce effect over a longer period of time? I have reason to suspect that they might not, but be interested in your view.
What we looked at was mostly the short-term impacts, because that's usually what people tend to react to, the short-term change in their work effort or incentives to work in response to the receipt of cash transfers from government or the absence of cash transfers. So that would be 1 year, the impact over a year, 2 years maybe.
Do you have reason to believe that long-term elasticities would be different?
No reason to believe they would be any different. What could change over the longer term would be the changes in health determinants that could lead to better suitability for the labor market, but it's not something we have looked into.
And if I could finish my round of questions on the modality of how the basic income likely would be delivered, which is through the tax system. You've already mentioned, and my colleagues have pointed out, that there is a too large number of Canadians who don't file taxes, so they would have to be brought into the system. We are, of course, CRA is experimenting with automatic filing, so that will help with that challenge. But isn't it correct that the fact that so many people don't file currently puts them at a disadvantage as it is, because they're not getting these non-refundable tax credits? And so even the effort to just bring them into the system, whether or not we have a basic income, would be beneficial for this population.
Clearly, although those who don't file are not all people who would benefit from filing, there are people, like I know public servants, who don't file taxes because they know they don't owe any taxes. They expect a small, humble tax return or tax refund, rather, so they don't bother filing. So not everybody who doesn't file would have a big benefit in filing, but it is true that only ensuring that those who would benefit from government benefits file, that would bring a couple of 100,000 people into benefits, or would give them benefits to which they are eligible but don't get because of lack of filing.
20 seconds.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and perhaps at some point you can help us understand the distribution of non-filers and how many of them are in situations where they probably very poor and unable to file taxes by themselves, and therefore would in fact benefit, as opposed to the group of public servants who too lazy to file because they feel that they're not going to get
on that
anything
question.
back.
Thank you, Senator Wu.
Thank you.
On that question, could you follow up, Mr. Giroux, in writing, please?
We'll do that.
Thank you. I will now recognize Senator Lofreda to be followed by Senator McAdam. Senator Lofreda, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
You and Mr. Amar for being here this morning. The huge positive of Guaranteed Livable Basic Income would be that it's reducing poverty rates, or would reduce poverty rates by 1/2. My question is, why isn't that number greater than 1/2? And how do you consider the cost benefit of such a program on the economy as a whole? Have you analyzed its impact on the economy? And how would it affect the majority of Canadians? Because obviously, the impact on the economy will affect the majority of Canadians, without getting into the details, but we know why it's being questioned at certain levels.
So the first question, why isn't the reduction in poverty greater than 1/2? It's because of the very design of the Guaranteed Basic Income. The parameters that we used established the benefit at, I think, 75% of the LMI. So by design, it's set at a rate that would keep a portion of the population in below the poverty line. So its very design is such that it will not reduce poverty to zero.
Would you not want, before you answer the other questions, would you not want a Guaranteed Livable Basic Income program to reduce poverty rates greater than 1/2? I mean, the cost to society is, we've looked at the numbers, it's not a nominal cost.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you want that to be one of the objectives?
That certainly could be one of the objectives, but it would mean an even higher cost and potentially higher disincentives to work. So it's a policy decision, and we were given parameters to estimate and to cost the program. That's what we used, but we could do the same exercise with a higher guaranteed basic income. The cost would be higher, and we'd get slightly different numbers in terms of incentives, disincentives to work. With respect to your, sorry?
impact on the economy and majority of Canadians?
Yeah, impact on the economy. We did not estimate the impact on the economy per se, but by having a segment or a majority of the population reduce their own disposable income, so quintiles 3, 4, and 5 would suffer or would have a reduction in their disposable income. That would reduce their consumption and investment. On the other hand, the consumption and investment, probably more consumption of the first 2 quintiles would go up, but the impact would probably mostly come from the disincentives to work. So we did not estimate the impact on the economy, but we can guess that the impact on the economy could potentially be slightly negative through a reduction in the work effort of those and due to the introduction of a guaranteed basic income.
Just to add to that, we have estimate like the impact on number of hours that will be worked, but also on the payroll overall. And there is difference between these two aspects. So we have seen that will be a negative effect of around 1.5% for the number of hours working, but overall the payroll will just be reduced less than that, maybe 0.5 or 0.6%, because this disincentive will be mainly observed for the low income or low wage people. So if you relate that to the economic impact, you can assume that will be not that big, actually, in terms of consumption or other aspect.
You mentioned disincentive to work a few times, and if it does create scarce resources, we all know excess liquidity, scarce resources lead to inflation. We've seen it in the CERB to a certain degree. Would that not hinder or the same people we're trying to help? I mean, inflation helps those that have assets. Those that don't, it penalizes. It becomes a punitive measure. So what are your comments on that?
Yes, it would probably, if it was to be further increasing inflation, it could have a marginal impact on the inflationary suffering of those individuals. But we have not looked at that in details. It would depend on the monetary response from the introduction of such a program, and it would depend on the macroeconomic conditions. So it's very difficult to determine with a high level of certainty without running that into an economic simulation model.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Sénateur Lofredo.
Thank you, Senator Lofredo.
Par le sénateur Dagenet. Senator McAdam, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you for your work on this subject. I have a couple of questions. So your April 7th, 2021 report shows gross GBI costs ranging from $85 billion to $93.3 billion over the 5-year period, ending 25-26. So that includes the disability cost and the behavioral costs, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So throughout the various reports that you've produced, there's a mention of offsets that could be used to fund the guaranteed basic income. And one that you mentioned in your April 2021 report is the full cancellation of the federal basic personal amount and a 44% reduction in the provincial personal amount. So in a subsequent, or an earlier report rather, in July 2020, there was a table B1 where you included potential savings of various credits, including the basic personal amounts, and it was calculated at $46.4 billion for a certain, I think it's a 6-month period. So I just want to get you to elaborate a bit on this calculation. I'm wondering how much of this $46.4 billion is for the cancellation of basic personal exemptions versus, tax credit offsets regarding programs that are in place for low-income Canadians. So that's one part of it. And do you have equivalent figures for the 5-year periods ending 25-26? Like, have you updated those figures, that 46.4?
So I can probably answer that last question. We have not updated these numbers yet. So the last calculations and estimates we've done are indeed in the report, in the 2021 report, April 2021 report. With respect to how much of the cost, the gross cost, would be offset by the basic personal amount and other equivalent provincial credits, we would probably have to get back to you with the specific numbers, because we did list all the potential offsets to reduce the net cost, but I don't have the specific line items and their contribution to the offset right here with me.
Yeah, to add to that, yes, that's right. So we don't have like exact number, but even it's not that simple actually. The thing is that this all transfer and programs are connected, and there is kind of correlation. So if you cancel one, will affect other programs. So even the order of cancellation matters here. So if you cancel one program before the other one, will affect the transfer other one. So like the exact share, like you can't really estimate the exact share because it depends on order, but you can have like a rough idea how will be like the approximation of these shares in terms of basic income funding.
So is the cancellation of the basic personal exemption included in that 46.4 billion?
Like for the distribution analysis, we have.
It's on table B1 of your July 2020 report.
Like for the one with the COVID, so that one we didn't really try to see what exact amount of dollar that will be needed to fund the GBI. Just we identify what potential program that will be used to fund the program. But the next report, that's the one really that we have estimated, we have identified exact what will be the programs and the rate of cancellation that needed to fund the program itself.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Sénateur Dagenet, la parole est à vous, s'il vous plaît.
Senator Dagenet, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Giroux. We see for some years now the extent to which the federal government has been offering services to the population. And I'm very much concerned about the transformation of many programs, services that, to my mind, are fiscally illogical. Some $93 billion a year, and you also have the area of jurisdiction of the provinces. Do you not think it would be better to have a federal-provincial common work that would allow for changes that would be cooperative rather than just politically motivated? And I don't want to really say that the political class is the engine behind it. Well, we can't speak to jurisdiction or to mechanics, but in terms of the guaranteed basic income. But of course, it is very clear when you consider the implementation of a program like that, which includes, which would replace rather, to a great extent, social assistance and other provincial programs, it would be advantageous to have cooperation and coordination between the federal government and the provinces if the federal government is going to bring in a guaranteed basic income. But as you have said, when you start involving rather 14 various jurisdictions, that is to say, including the federal government, you have to take into consideration the fact that there are programs that already exist. You look to cooperation between the federal government and the provinces. You look to the cost. You look to the impact that will have on the population. But we can't speak to the mechanics or to the best way of reaching that objective. But don't you have an idea of the resources that would be necessary to provide such a program, at least at the federal level? Wouldn't it be more logical to involve the provinces, because the provinces can deliver a program in a more targeted fashion? Well, it depends. It's possible. that would depend on what is chosen by the federal government or the provinces. It could be that the best option would be to transfer the funds so that the provinces operate the funds according to federal norms, or there are ideas like we have given the cost per province to see whether or not that would be preferable to have a transfer to a province, but I can't speak to that. The best approach would be to look to the design of the program and what is possible. But the creation of a guaranteed revenue, a guaranteed basic income, would that not affect a whole panoply of targeted programs? Well, this is a question that's difficult to answer. I would say this: a program that includes what has already been done, what already exists on paper, intending to reduce poverty, rather than a little program here and a little program over there, where when you start moving them around, it can negatively affect some other program. When you have a specific administration with. So what I'm saying is that you want to have a consistent program, a uniform program that. Thank you, Chair.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Honorable Senators, we, to maximize all our time with the first panel, I, as chair, if you permit me, I could ask senators if they want to ask one question each, and we'll ask the PBO to send us the answer in writing. This would enable certainly what I would call max the time for the first panel. So there's a consensus around the table to do that? Okay, so now I will recognize for one question Senator Marshall, Senator Forêt, and Senator Gignac.
Thank you
Senator
very much,
Marshall,
Mr.
please.
Chair, and thank you very much. So, Mr. Giroux, in your report, you do say that 6 million Canadians will benefit from the program, and then 16 million will incur a net loss or net reduction in their disposable income. So we have a progressive tax system. So in the summary in Figure 1 in your April 2021 report, the fourth quintile, the average household disposable income is reduced by $1,900, but the fifth quintile only by $1,600. So it seemed like the number should be reversed. So I would like an explanation of that. If you could send some information on that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Senator Marshall. Senator Forêt, la parole est à vous pour une question.
You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. I have a question that is an important one, I think. Further to what we tried to do in 2021, that is to assess the impact of a basic guaranteed income. We didn't really measure the impact of that on social services, on poverty, and so on. Can that be done? And when you look at the positive impact, in how can I say, the non-consumption of existing services, can you find an equation that would reflect the overall positive effects of such a basic guaranteed income?
Senator Gignac, s'il vous plaît.
Senator Gignac.
If it's possible to update your fiscal sustainability report, given the new environment with interest rate and the fact that this government, with the NPD's report, in fact, want to integrate the universal drug program plan and the dental service. So in both cases, you have published some estimate. So I just want to know if it's still around 45 billion, the maneuvering room, in order before analyzing that project. I think.
Senator Wu, to be followed by le sénateur Dagenet. Senator Wu. Okay. Sénateur Dagenet, s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous avez une question?
Do you have a question? In view of the fact that we are maximizing our time, I'll maximize it further by not asking a question.
Conclude, honorable senators. As we conclude, honorable senators, I will ask the sponsor of the bill if she has questions. Senator Pate, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
You have the floor, Senator Pate. Thank you.
Thank you again for coming. And to follow up some of my colleagues' questions, the whole issue of debt financing and potential impact on inflation, I'd ask you to explore a bit more the models that could be looked at in terms of debt financing, including your own costing, which you seem to agree, and I think you repeated, would not worsen inflation. And to look at some of the examples, for instance, the CMHC Rent Assist program, which was operated in Manitoba for many years and was seen as a form of cash transfer, did not result in inflationary impacts on rents. As well, in terms of the potential work incentives, if you could clarify in terms of some of the modeling, you clearly identify this negligible impact, and I appreciate, Mr. Amar, you expanding on that. But many who have received cash assistance utilize those resources to take time to find other kinds of training, work, to care for other people, and whether there's been any costing of those that you look at. And finally, in terms of 2020 literature review of guaranteed livable basic income type measures, it concluded that a detailed research did not find any evidence of a significant reduction in labor supply. Instead, they found evidence that labor supply increased globally among adults, men, women, and young and old. And so if there's anything that contradicts that, if you could also provide, but also if you could provide any additional information that supports those conclusions, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Senator Pate, merci beaucoup. To Mr. Giroux, this concludes the panel. Merci, and I want to reiterate that we have a common denominator. It's transparency, accountability, reliability, and predictability. Cela dit, as we have asked and we've agreed that written answers to be sent through the clerk by the end of the day on Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. And in closing, for 1 minute, do you have any additional comments, Senator, for the senators, Mr. Giroux?
Yes, I have to say it's always a pleasure to testify before you, but that last round always makes me very nervous because you give me and my team a lot of homework, and that's probably the worst 5 minutes of that testimony.
So that said, there's no doubt that I can share with you that we'll see you tomorrow night. Cela dit, we will now suspend honorable senators for 2 minutes in order to bring the next panel. Honorable senators, welcome back. We are resuming our study of Bill S-233. We're joined this morning by former Premier of Ontario, Madame Kathleen Wynne. Welcome, Madame Premier.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
And also from Madame Evelyne Forget, Professeur Sciences de la Santé Communautaire, University.
Professor, Community Health Services, U of M.
Zaing Zhao, and that's my Acadian side of New Brunswick. So, Associate Professor, University of British Columbia. Welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation to appear in front of the National Finance Committee of the Senate. Nous commencerons par les remarques.
We will start with opening remarks by Premier Wynne, followed by Professor Forget, and then Associate Professor Zhao.
First, please, for your comments.
Thank Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate all of you for inviting me to speak in support of Bill S-233. The idea of a guaranteed basic income for Canadians most in need of support is not a new one, and I think all of the senators recognize that. There's already a range of programs in place that provide that exact guarantee to certain groups in our society, but not all. The Guaranteed Annual Income System Supplement in Ontario is provided on top of old age security payment for seniors in need. The Ontario Child Benefit and the Federal Canada Child Benefit guarantee a supplement to families with children. The Canada Disability Benefit to be introduced will supplement provincial support. So those programs are already in place, and we see demonstrable benefits from those. When I became Premier of Ontario in 2013, our government was about to receive a report from Mr. Munir Sheikh and Francis Lankin, one of your colleagues, and they had done a review of our social assistance program because we were looking for ways to improve a system that was not working as it should. The task had been to recommend changes to make the system more rational, more dignified, more supportive of people, both who could enter the workforce, for example, to allow recipients to own more assets and earn more money, but still not lose benefits, and for those who could not enter the workforce. However, the authors were not asked to comment on the adequacy of social assistance programs. In other words, the amount of money that was received. I became increasingly concerned that our efforts would amount to no more than a sort of incrementalist approach around the edges of a system that had demonstrated that it already did not succeed in lifting people out of poverty. I had been impressed by the work done in Manitoba in the MINCOME pilot in the 1970s, and I know Evelyn may talk more about that. And as a member of our government's Poverty Reduction Committee, we were tasked with providing input into our poverty reduction legislation. As Premier, I was looking for tangible improvements in people's lives as a result of a government program that would support involvement in community, including work placements, encourage school retention, and potentially support improved health outcomes. And those were all anecdotal benefits of the MINCOME project. And I just want to say, having listened to the parliamentary budget officer, it's so clear that we do not look at the cost savings of having those benefits in place. So I don't think we can assess the impact of a guaranteed basic income unless we understand that there will be savings as a result of those improved lives. So those were exactly the kinds of outcomes that we were starting to see as a result of the Ontario Basic Income pilot before it was canceled by the current Ford government in Ontario. And despite the fact that the current government had promised to maintain the pilot for the 3-year duration. It was not maintained, and so we did not get the evidence that we were looking for. I had turned in the setting up of the Ontario Basic Income pilot to Hugh Siegel, your former colleague, to help us. We used the report that Hugh produced as a basis for the Ontario pilot, and in designing the pilot, we took a lot of care to attach real dollar amounts to the program so that the researchers would be able to draw concrete conclusions about the cost of the model. We budgeted a total of $50 million over 3 years to support 4,000 people, plus setup costs and evaluation and maintenance of health benefits for social assistance clients. It seemed to me that we had the evidence from the supplements that are already in place that I already enumerated, that such a system can work and can make a substantial difference in people's lives, while the social assistance programs in place for people of Ontario between the ages of 18 and 64 were often humiliating, inadequate. They were ineffective traps, keeping people from breaking out of intergenerational poverty. At the same time, we were grappling with the realities, and we still are, of technology displacing workers across all sectors of employment, of industry, commerce, and service. We have made a decision as a society that we are not interested in institutionalizing people, and yet we have not put the supports in place in the community that are needed. On a daily basis, we hear from cities, towns, villages across this country about homelessness, food insecurity crises that are not abating. So I think that right now the Canadian government has an opportunity to develop cross-jurisdictional supports for most vulnerable Canadians. I had always hoped that the Canadian government would work with us and other subnational jurisdictions who had expressed an interest to test the implementation of a guaranteed livable income as a national strategy, and that can happen now. We actually know that the cost of not putting these supports in place is visible to us. It's visible to us all socially, in terms of health outcomes, and in the reality of increasing income inequality. The Canadian government has the opportunity right now to lay out a transition to a better way. And I'm just going to bring Hugh Siegel into this because I know we are thinking of him, so many of us, and he would have loved to be here to have this conversation. From his book, Bootstraps Need Boots, he says, simply put, my life experience has shown me that poverty is a cause of much of the dysfunction that our societies need to address. It is not rocket science to figure out that someone can live a better life at 70% of the poverty line than at 45%, or that a basic income design that encourages work will be more helpful for a dynamic and growing society than a welfare regime that discourages it. There are people sitting in your committee room today, because I've seen them on my screen, who benefited from the basic income, who got back into work, who were able to put themselves back into the community in a good way. And I believe that we have an opportunity right now to look at the entire picture of what a program like this could offer to people in this country. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Première Ministre.
Thank you very much.
Is Professor Forget, please be followed by Professor Zhao. Professor, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. This bill that we're considering today specifically addresses adults of working age, that is, people between 18 and 64. This is a really challenging group to talk about, and many people wonder whether it might not be better to introduce good job training programs and labor market policies that lead to better wages and working conditions than to take a chance on a basic income that might discourage people from working. We know that the best empirical evidence out there suggests that a well-designed basic income will not substantially reduce the number of hours worked. Some people have argued that it will increase the hours worked or move people into better jobs. We've just seen that the PBO estimated a reduction in the number of hours worked of only 1.5% at most. However, what I'd like to argue is that we need both better labor market policies and a basic income. Not everyone can work at a regular job that pays enough to allow them to live above the poverty line. Some people have disabilities and receive disability support, but many people with disabilities don't qualify for such support, particularly those with recurring disabilities, or including especially mental health conditions. Other people simply don't have the job skills that would pay a living wage. Some of those people can be retrained, but clearly not all. Sometimes there are no jobs to be had because the Bank of Canada has taken particular policies, or there's no transportation to the jobs that do exist. Other people have personal responsibilities and limitations that make regular paid employment impossible. Some people have lived with such devastating personal and generational trauma that they have to do a great deal of work on themselves before they're ready to work for anyone else. I was at an event on October 4th at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights on behalf of missing and murdered Indigenous women that reminded me once again of how many Canadians have lived on incomes between $6,000 and $10,000 a year for most of their lives. Few people who've lived on the streets for any stretch of time can expect to take a short job training course and become employable at a job that pays a living wage. So you look at that kind of evidence and you wonder whether what we actually need are social programs designed to address the very special needs of marginalized groups instead of a basic income. And again, the answer to that is that we need both specific social programs and we need a basic income. We need treatment for people who use substances. We need harm reduction policies, mental health services. We need all kinds of supports. But it's really hard for people to take advantage of these policies when they don't have a full belly and a roof over their heads, shelter from the cold. I live in Winnipeg. which has the largest Indigenous population of any city in Canada. Many of the absolutely essential social programs we have in place struggle a lot to be perceived as something other than colonial overreach. There isn't a lot of trust among the population, and coercing people into a job training program or addiction treatment programs in order to meet their most basic needs is both ineffective and demeaning. The stability that a basic income introduces into people's lives allows them to take advantage of these social programs on their own terms to move forward to benefit their own lives. Now, I think many people recognize that a basic income might be a beneficial policy, but they wonder if we can afford it. They wonder if this is the right time to be talking about a basic income. Years ago, I looked at the Mincome project, which took place in Manitoba in the mid-1970s. That project ended in 1978 as it was planned. The results were very positive. The researchers wanted to continue the project. But instead, they were told to archive the data because times were tough. At the end of the 80s, we were looking at high interest rates. We were looking at high inflation rates. It just wasn't the right time. A few years later, the MacDonald Commission, which reported in 1984, recommended a guaranteed income. We got NAFTA, but the guaranteed income got sidelined because, again, 1984, times were tough. It wasn't the right time to talk about a guaranteed income. I'd just like to end by suggesting that times are always tough. The economy is always in crisis, or it's about to fall into crisis, or it's just emerging from a crisis. We have an opportunity to look beyond the immediate future, to make plans over a long period of time that can transform people's lives, transform the kind of society we live in. And I think we have to remember especially that hard times are always hardest for those who have the least. We need a basic income, and I would urge you to look at this bill carefully and to talk to people, talk to a wide range of people who can help to bring together a good project design for a basic income that can make a real difference in the kind of society we live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Forget. Professor Zhao, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me today. As a cognitive scientist, I've studied how humans perform in the conditions of scarcity. My work has shown the detrimental cognitive tax of poverty, and that is, our cognitive function declines when we experience poverty, equivalent to a 13-point drop in IQ. Now, this drop is equivalent to aging 15 years from 45 to 60 years old. My colleagues' work has also shown that poverty makes workers less productive and more prone to errors at work. In fact, a growing body of studies have shown a psychological trap of poverty. That is, poverty saps brain power, making it more difficult to escape poverty. Giving people cash is one of the most effective and cost-effective ways to reduce poverty. Basic income provides not only the critical financial resources to low-income individuals, but also freedom and dignity. My team at UBC and Foundations for Social Change have recently published a peer-reviewed article at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where we show that giving $7,500 to people experiencing homelessness in Vancouver, BC, improved their cognitive function and well-being within 3 months of the cash transfer. Over 1 year, these recipients reduced homelessness by 99 days, and the reduced reliance on social services generated a savings of $8,277 per person per year, and that is a net savings of $777 per person per year. We also found that the cash transfer did not lead to increased spending on alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. Instead, the cash transfer reduced substance use severity by 90% in our recipients. The cash was primarily spent on food, rent, transit, and durable goods. We've heard from our participants that this cash transfer gave them peace of mind so that they can think properly and make good decisions for themselves and for their family. Our study is not the first one to show the benefits of cash transfers. In fact, hundreds of cash transfers around the world have demonstrated the same pattern of results: improved well-being, improved health conditions, cognitive function, and food security. And in some cases, cash transfers led to reduced crime rate and reduced alcohol and substance use. We're currently expanding the cash transfer study in British Columbia so that they can benefit more people and lifting people out of homelessness on a larger scale. We want to scale up the project to benefit more low-income individuals, as well as demonstrating that this can work in other regions in British Columbia. The need to raise the income floor has never been greater. Since more people are being displaced by the rising living costs and the devastating environmental disasters in Canada. In a recent national survey, 50% of Canadians are pessimistic about their personal finances. A quarter of the low-income households cannot pay for monthly expenses. This presents tremendous stress on people's mind, increasing the risks of a downward spiral into deep poverty, which will only cost us more. Bill S-233 aims to provide a guaranteed livable basic income to all Canadians. This can not only alleviate the financial strains, but unleash the vast human potential that's currently trapped by poverty. A livable basic income can make Canadians more productive members of the society and generate net savings for the government over the long term. This is a true investment in Canadians. In this spirit, we're actively looking at designing a guaranteed livable basic income project in Prince George, BC, with support from Mayor Simon Yu, Indigenous leaders, and stakeholders in the province. So in closing, I strongly urge the government to test the implementation of a guaranteed livable basic income as a national strategy to reduce the economic, social, and human costs of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, honorable senators. We will now move immediately for questions. And the first round will be for 5 minutes. I will now recognize Senator Marshall, to be followed by the Senator Forêt and then Senator Gignac.
Yes.
Senator Marshall, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Ms. Wynne because you've lived the experience, so I'm very interested in your testimony. But just to clarify a couple facts for me. The $50 million, was it for each of the 3 fiscal years, or was it $50 million in total?
It was a total amount, Senator.
It was a total, and it was funded completely by the province. There was no federal or
we had
municipal.
no federal.
It was all
No,
it was
we
all
had no
provincial
federal
money. All
participation.
provincial.
Yeah.
So was there ever an evaluation of the program or an interim evaluation? Because it seems like that's what we're lacking in a lot of these cases.
Well, we had hoped, Senator, and in the election in 2018, the opposition party at the time said that they would continue the pilot, but as soon as the Ford government was elected, they canceled it in the first year. So we didn't have, and that's to me the great tragedy of this, is that we don't have the evidence. And Evelyn Forget was involved in the design, and we were really hoping that we would have the evidence that would allow us to move forward and design a program that would work for Ontario. So I'm sorry to tell you that we don't have the statistical evidence. What we do have is anecdotal evidence, Senator.
Yes, that was my next question. Do you have? Yes.
Absolutely. You know, I visited with people who, during the time that I was still premier, I visited with people who were on the basic income, and then after the program was canceled, I became part of the conversation with people who had the experience. And what we found was exactly what both the other panelists have talked about. We found that people were more motivated and more able to get into the workplace. I met with a man, for example, who was able to get his car back on the road and get back into work. He had to leave the workforce to look after his mom, had fallen into poverty and had gotten stuck. And when the basic income pilot came along, he was able to actually get back into the workforce. I met young people who were able to buy some clothes in order to be able to apply for jobs and also go back to school. So it's all anecdotal, but we did see the kinds of movement and the kind of security and calm that came from having just that extra bit of cash. You know, it was $17,000 a year. It's not a lot of money that was given to each recipient, but it was enough that the worries about putting food on the table and having something to wear to work and having transportation to get to work started to be less of an issue.
Okay, thank you. Do I have enough time to ask a question of all the
2
panelists?
minutes.
Okay. This issue of the guaranteed basic income being a disincentive for work, is there a fear that once you provide additional financial assistance that they could lose other benefits? And I'm thinking of things like a drug card. Once you get to a certain income level, you would lose your drug card, which is very, very important to people receiving financial assistance. So could you talk about that aspect of the incentive not to work? Can you just address that concern?
Senator, I'll just take a crack at this, and then the other two may want to weigh in. We did encounter this when we first put out the call, because it was a randomized access to people across the province, right? And we found that there was low uptake among people who were worried about that very thing. We actually had to work to adjust the program. And I think when you listen to the parliamentary budget officer, there are a whole lot of parameters that have to be looked at. And the last thing we want to do is create a system where people are worse off than they were before. And so we actually had to adjust the program so that some of those benefits were incorporated into the program. I don't know if Evelyn or, yeah.
Thank you. Professor Forget, comment? Professor Zhao also?
Yeah, I'll just echo that if I can. I think that no one sees a basic income as a program that's just pasted on top of all of the other programs. The existing programs already have a lot of contradictions built into them. And so what basic income does is it gives us an opportunity to clean out a lot of those programs and to make sure that they work together. It's a much larger scheme.
Yeah, so for the work disincentive argument, the empirical evidence argues otherwise. Actually, basic income has increased employment in certain demographics. In a currently running Denver project, basic income has increased full-time employment by 50%. So that's what the evidence says.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Second round. Senator Forêt, to be followed by the Senator Gignac. Senator Forêt, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for being with us this morning, witnesses. To Madame Forget, when we look at what happened during the pandemic, of course, the federal government it wasn't able to clearly measure the different programs, and that is of concern to me. 10% of Canadians or so don't file for income tax. And the people who are in the most fragile, the most vulnerable in society certainly don't. In that light, given that, and given the CERB that was made available to the public, what are the advantages of a guaranteed basic income?
I think I've lost the end of your question, but you were asking about asking about the non-filers and the implications for delivering a program. I would say first that basic income does not need to be delivered through the tax system. That's one option, but there are other ways of delivering a basic income. For example, if there were a cooperation between the provinces and the federal government, there's a lot of machinery at the provincial level that can be drawn on to deliver a basic income. So this is part of the design of a project. How do we do that? In terms of tax filing, I mean, I think that a lot of people don't file tax returns because it's not worth their while to file tax returns. Now, it's true that many very marginalized people don't get the benefits that they should be getting because they don't file tax returns. But I think that there are a lot of efforts put into place right across the country to increase that. For example, there was a political decision on a lot of reserves not to become involved in the tax system for all kinds of reasons. When the Canada Child Benefit was substantially increased in 2016, a lot of effort was made to ensure that people received the Canada Child Benefit, which was delivered through the tax system. And that was done both through a concerted effort to make sure that the people who should be filing are filing, to make sure that that information was available. But CRA also developed a simple one-page attestation of income. I can't remember the number offhand, but it became very, very convenient and very possible for people to file income taxes under those circumstances. So I think we have to look a whole lot at how we can improve that system if we're going to use the tax system to deliver benefits. I don't think that I think that that can be part and parcel of designing a basic income and asking ourselves how best to get it into people's hands.
Merci.
Thank you. Madame Nguyen, my question is the following. Your pilot project, which unfortunately did not come to term and was not extended, 4,000 people that fell under this pilot project. How were they chosen? How were the participants chosen? Were they chosen randomly, or were they chosen because of their social or financial situation? Can you tell me how you identified the participants? And this. We know that Canada is a federation where the provinces control some of the levers of social development through taxes, say, for example, social assistance. Well, how do you see a basic income, a guaranteed basic income? How would that be accepted by most provinces? I don't have translation, so I'm not able to be sure that I have fully understood your question.
The ability of us to, as a federation, have the provinces take part, that was the sub-question, right? And the willingness of the provinces to take part. And then the first part of the question was the 4,000 people who were involved. Can you just give me the last part of that?
The 4,000 people, how were they selected?
4,000 people for your experience.
Why we couldn't get the 4,000 people at the beginning?
What?
Yeah.
What?
So there was that was very disturbing to us at the beginning of the process, and we had to really do a better education of the communities that we were looking in. People needed more information. They weren't sure what we were trying to do. They were, as the previous senator mentioned, there was some concern about losing other benefits, although in that 4,000 people, it wasn't just people who were on social assistance who took part. It was people who were working or who did not have supports at all. So we needed more information to go out to people. There was a short time period. I think that was part of it, Senator, that there wasn't a lot of time for that education to take place. And I think that any framework that would be developed as a result of this legislation would need that period of time to let people know what it was they were doing. Because as the parliamentary budget, and the second thing, in terms of the federation, I believe that a design for a program across the country would be palatable to provinces, depending on the parameters, because every province is dealing with issues of poverty.
Thank you, Premier. Merci. Senator Gignac, to be followed by Senator Smith and then Senator Pate. Senator Gignac, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Prime Minister. Premier Nguyen. I myself was involved in active politics for some years with Premier Charest, that you know well, who you know well, and I thank you for your public service.
So in Finland, contrary to Ontario, they run they have implemented a trial, basic income trial, in the last 2 years, and now we have the postmortem of that 2 years. So quickly, they mentioned that the people well-being has increased. They was more happy, but they have no real impact on the labor participation for those has been involved. So have you analyzed the Finland experience? Because contrary to Ontario, they have not been cancelled by a new election. So any thought on that one?
I have not. Perhaps Professor Forget or Professor Zhao may be able to speak to that. But what I do know is that Finland has been a leader in terms of creating a social safety net. There's certainly lessons that we've been able to learn from Finland's education system. And I think that the improvement of quality of life in the broader community is a really important lesson that we take away. We had a little bit of a glimpse of that from the Income Project, and that was why we set up what was called a saturation site in Ontario. But the principle of that is that if everyone is doing better, if the people who are doing the worst in our society do better, then everyone does better. And I think that's a lesson that's important for us to learn.
Later to Madame Forget. But in Quebec, which is a progressive society, as you know, we have discussed in the previous panel that Couillard government has put in place an expert group, and they arrived to the conclusion that this basic income will have a low social acceptance because a lot of people in middle income, high income will have a tax burden increase. The incentive to work is very low, and they have an equity problem because some people with disability will earn less under basic income. So any reaction from this expert from Quebec who have analyzed that in 2017, this project?
Are you asking me, Senator?
Yeah, yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Premier Wynne.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. I guess I would say just that it depends on the design of the program. And I think if there are challenges that we confront with a particular model, then we need to look at the problem we're trying to solve and then adjust the program. And I think that's what this legislation is about, is to look at all those parameters and develop a framework that would work across the country.
And finally, if time allows, a quick one. So rather to go with a from coast to coast program, do you think that it will be better for federal government to offer to any province or one territory who want to have a pilot program with one territory or one province rather than try to sit all the provinces together? And what is your politics 101 suggestion on this one?
Well, I was hoping that when we did our pilot in Ontario that we would have the cooperation of the federal government. That it didn't work out that way. So I think either model could work, but I do believe that this is a national conversation now. Issues around poverty and homelessness and food insecurity they're not relegated to one province, Senator. And so I think that we actually need to have the national discussion, and that's what this legislation would allow us to do.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Smith, to be followed by Senator Pate. Senator Smith, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Dr. Zhao. The recipients in your study generally represented a third of the homeless population in Vancouver, and it was noted they were mild users of substance, had mild psychiatric symptoms. Just wondering if you looked at all at more of the risk population so that you would have had a total study. And I'm just thinking of the higher users of substance, psychiatric problems, etc. Have you done any further research to try to get that groups, which possibly would give you a higher degree of credibility when you're talking to people who would be resistant to trying to implement such a program?
That's a good question. So we looked at individuals with moderate levels of use, just not severe levels of use. In fact, a lot of our participants have active addiction, substance use issues currently. We are expanding the project to see how the cash transfer will generalize to the broader population, but we have not included people with severe mental health or substance use challenges at this point. Now, I think the motivation for that question is to understand the potential risks of cash transfers to people with severe levels of substance use or mental health symptoms. My answer to that is this cash transfer is unlikely to increase the risks of cash on these individuals because they already have access to cash as the welfare programs that currently exist. $7,500 or basic income is not going to lead to overdose or increasing overdose because it really takes $10 or even less to overdose. It does not depend on the amount of cash they receive. Second, past studies past basic income programs around the world have shown that basic income actually reduced reliance on alcohol and substance over time. And that evidence comes from the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina. Over 11 years, the basic income in that community actually reduced alcohol and substance use. And that speaks to the other side of the puzzle, which is people use because they're in poverty or homelessness, not the other way around. So that's my response.
Do I have time for one more?
Please, Senator Smith.
Madam Forget, I'm just wondering if you, as you look at this, and there's so many individuals who are trying to do good things in this program or potential program, I guess a simple question that sort of strikes me is, how do you mobilize people from all the different parts or geographic places in our country who are really concerned and have some fantastic ideas in their mind? How do you mobilize this group to set up? And I know that Senator Pate's doing this with the bill, but how do you mobilize that population out there of people who are leaders who are going to say, hey, let's get this thing organized properly so that people can't say no to us?
Probably the hardest question you could ask me. I think that one of the real limitations of the system we have is that there are literally hundreds of programs across the country.
Right.
Some of them are simple cash transfers, some of them are combinations of services and transfers, some are services. They're all run by people in their own little silo, in a sense, and everybody thinks that they've got the answer to whatever it is we're doing. I think that one of the things that is becoming more commonly recognized across the system is that these problems are all interrelated. You know, if we're trying to deal with the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, we can't do it without looking at a whole range of other issues that impact on people's lives. If we're looking at issues of addiction, of substance use, we can't do it without looking at poverty, at homelessness, and at all of the things that go along with it. And I think that one of the things that we see at its core is that poverty actually requires money. You actually have to get money into people's hands so that they can make decisions. And it really does simplify, in some ways, the possibility of those people who fall between the gaps in the programs, those people who aren't compliant, those people who don't fit into the programs that are set up. What cash does is it allows them to make their own decisions and come to the programs and make use of them the way that they can. So I think that a basic income is foundational. How we get to that, I think we are moving towards it, but the progress is a whole lot slower than I'd like to see.
Senator Pate, to be followed by Senator Wu. Senator Pate, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our witnesses for your lifetimes of work on this and so many other issues. I'd like to pick up on Senator Smith's question. And my question for each of you, maybe in the order that you presented, starting with Premier Nguyen and then with Dr. Forget, Dr. Zhao and Dr. Forget, is why now, and how would this assist people to deal with the current crises we're seeing? You mentioned environmental crises, financial crises. You mentioned homelessness and poverty that we're seeing. You've mentioned that we have looked at staged models from the child benefits to guaranteed income supplements, now the disability benefit. We know that Quebec and BC have said not a full thing, but let's do it in incremental ways. What's really holding us back? If you can expand more on what each of you were just saying, and why is it that we're seeing the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry, for instance, the status of women? Others clearly go to this kind of approach, and yet governments balk at it. Maybe start with you, Premier Wynne. You didn't, I know, but.
So the what's holding us back, I think it was interesting what Professor Forget said, that times are always tough, that whenever we propose, and I'm reminded when we in Ontario said we were going to raise the minimum wage to $14, 4 years before business had said it's not the right time. 4 years later, when the economy was better in 2017, they said the time's not right. So I think there's always going to be an argument that this is too expensive, we can't afford it, the time's not right. I would suggest to you that some of the issues that we've already raised, that you just enumerated, are reaching crisis proportions, and that we have tried a lot of things that haven't worked. And now I think it's time to try something that we actually know does work. Putting money in people's hands. I mean, both Professor Zhao and Professor Forget have talked about the realities of that in other programs. We saw it in Ontario. And so I think it's time that we use what we know and design a program that we know is going to help.
I think one of the things that strikes me right now is that many of our social programs out there are laboring under excess demands. They're barely coping. I am on the board of a community financial counseling services, and we're running through counselors. We're burning out our counselors because they're dealing with problems, and massive problems that they've never had to face before. That's true in my sector. It's true for food banks. It's true for every organization I can point to. We are reaching a crisis position. We have to make some decisions going forward. I am a bit of a historian, and I've been doing healthcare for a long time. And one of the things that really comes to mind over and over again when we talk about basic income are some of the battles that led up to the introduction of Medicare over the years. And I think sometimes that crisis gives you an opportunity to do better things. But I think we also need to be able to look beyond the next election cycle. This short-term perspective, this notion that times are tough right now, we'll just boot it forward and somebody can deal with it 5 years from now. The next regime can answer the questions. Things can happen over and over again. I think we have to bring a longer-term perspective and start asking about how our society would be different if we put in place a basic income today.
There is an emergency of homelessness and crisis in Canada. The recent homelessness count in Vancouver shows there's a 32% increase in the homeless population, while the entire population of Vancouver only increased 3%. So the current approaches are failing, and failing significantly, so we need to try something different. Basic income is a rational investment to reduce homelessness and poverty effectively. The biggest pushback I've heard is increases in taxes, that people think it's not fair to use my tax dollars to pay for the poor. The reality is that that's not the case. If we implement basic income, it would only affect the top maybe 5% of the income earners. It won't impact the taxes of the vast majority of Canadians. That's number one. Number two is basic income actually reduces our taxpayers' money. It's cost effective overall. It's less than what we currently spend on poverty.
Thank you very much. Do I have time for a short?
No, three seconds. So,
Okay.
so Senator Wu to be followed by the Senator Lofreda. Senator Wu,
Chair.
please.
Thank you, former Premier Wynne. Thank you, Professors Zhao and Forget. There's a body of analysts, particularly economists, who've studied this issue and who would likely share, I'm sure they would share your concern about poverty, homelessness, people who are displaced for various reasons. They would share perhaps also your findings on the beneficial effects of cash transfers, but who might say that a targeted approach is better than a universal basic income. This is basically the thesis of both the Quebec study and the BC study. So I'd like you to talk a bit more about why you are advocating universality, and I know there are different ways to calibrate that, but why don't we just do a more targeted approach? Find the people in the downtown east side, all of them, and give them the cash transfer, but don't give it to anyone else. Perhaps Dr. Chow can start, followed by Professor Forget and former Premier Wynne.
Thank you, Senator. The targeted approach are both ineffective and inefficient. It ended up costing us more over the long run, because that's what we are currently doing. And what we see, this is not working at reducing poverty or homelessness. A basic income is more effective and cost-effective over the long run. That's my short answer. But I can pass it over to Evelyn to speak to the more specifics.
I think I agree with that absolutely. It's not an efficient way of dealing with things. The more targeted programs you introduce, the more gaps you introduce into the system. The more gaps there are, the more opportunities there are for people to slide through, to not quite fit. Basic income is a more universal approach, so everybody can get access to at least some supports. So I think that's one answer. I am an economist, and I understand the criticism, the idea. I think if you're dealing with a small problem, a targeted approach is appropriate. I think we're not dealing with a small problem. We're dealing with a lot of interrelated problems, and I think that targeted approaches simply don't work under that kind of a setting. I think we need something bigger than that. We need better ways of integrating what we have out there.
Yes, Ms. Wynne?
Yeah, so I'm not a researcher like the other two professors. And, you know, we in Ontario, we went for a program that identified a population that would be eligible. And I guess my response, Senator Wu, is that there are different models. There are different models within the frame of universal. And I think that that's exactly why this legislation is important, that we need to look at those models, work with people like Professor Forget and Professor Zhao, and figure out how to design a program that does not exclude, but includes everybody who needs to be included.
If I have a bit more time.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying, which is that the leakage that comes from a universal program, because some people will get it that maybe you feel don't need to get it, the leakage is less than the leakage of the targeted program, so we're better off with the universal program. I get that. This bill doesn't actually call for the implementation of basic income or guaranteed livable basic income. It calls for the construction of a framework, a national framework. In your opinion, what should this framework constitute? What are some concrete ideas that a framework could put in place so that we can move forward, even if it's in an incremental manner? Professor Chow, would you like to start?
Yep. So I think the ideas behind the framework are to establish the principles. What are the conditionalities? Establishing the parameters on requirements, who would be qualified or eligible for this program, at what costs, what benefits. So I think establishing these core principles of basic income are crucial. Now, the actual implementation will vary depending on the province and territory. So I think that's what the framework should say, is giving us the principles.
Thank you.
Yeah, we heard this morning from the parliamentary budget officer that a basic income has a lot of parameters. And I think that an opportunity to study it is an opportunity to bring people together from a lot of different sectors, to bring the provinces together, to bring federal representatives together, to bring nonprofits in, and to talk about what those parameters should be. And I mean, there are a couple that are sort of favorites to my mind. I think that we've approached the design of basic income with a certain lack of imagination. I think one of the most important things is to look at the definition of the family and the implications of different ways of defining the family, the benefit unit, and delivering the program. But I mean, I think that all of those factors, tax back rates, et cetera, need to be
Could it include encouragement for the design of pilot projects at the provincial, municipal, regional level?
We've got 14 different jurisdictions. I mean, 13 different jurisdictions.
On this, can you follow up to the clerk in writing, please? Thank you. The question from Senator Wu. Thank you. Senator Lofreda to be followed by Senator McAdam et Senator Dagenet. Monsieur Senator Lofreda.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you to our panelists for being here this morning. I agree that poverty is a dysfunction that our society must address, and it's a major worry across the country. And the main concern with respect to guaranteed basic livable income is not only the increase in taxes and costs, but it could lead to a disincentive to work, which leads to scarce resources, leads to inflation, and will hinder the same people we are trying to help. And Dr. Frochet, you mentioned that guaranteed basic livable income will increase hours worked and not disincentivize work. And I would welcome additional insight on those comments and conclusive findings on what you may have on that, and comments from other panelists are welcome on those findings or conclusions.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The whole work disincentive issue, my opinion is that a basic income has very little impact on the amount of hours worked. I believe that that's going to be the finding. There was a question about Finland, the Finnish experiment, a little while ago. They began that experiment with the hypothesis that people who received a basic income would work more hours than people who didn't receive a basic income. They didn't find that. They found absolutely no difference between the control group and the subjects. I talked to the director of that program, Ollie Kangas, and he told me something very interesting, though. Towards the end of the project, he did find a difference, not in terms of the number of hours worked, but in terms of the kinds of jobs that the subjects found relative to the control group. The control group, to the extent that they were still working the sort of temporary, handing out leaflets kind of jobs that they'd been working before the project came along. What happened to the subjects is that some of them were moving into real jobs, jobs that continued over time and that they would expect to see improve their lives. That didn't show up statistically, partly because the project wasn't long enough to see it. So I'd like to see those kinds of long-term impacts. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't believe that there's any evidence at all that a basic income either incentivizes or disincentivizes work. I don't think you're going to see a huge difference between the two. If you introduce a basic income, people aren't going to flee the job market. They haven't in any of the experiments we've put in place. They haven't when we've introduced basic income-like programs. When we introduced the Canada Child Benefit, mothers worked more, not less. So I just don't think that there's going to be a huge difference out there. What I meant to say when I was presenting was that some people seem to think it was going to increase labor market participation. Some people seem to think it's going to reduce it. I don't think there's any difference, and I don't think there's any evidence to support the notion that it's going to create much of a difference. I think the PBO was quite correct to use as a first estimate a 1.5% reduction in the number of hours worked when they did their report. That's a very, very small amount. It's an appropriate choice to make.
Senator Lofreda.
Thank you.
Senator McAdam, please, one question, and Senator Dagenet, une question. Senator McAdam, please.
And thank you to the panelists. So the Parliamentary Budget Officer in all the costing reports for guaranteed basic income used the low income measure as the basis for estimating the number and percentage of Canadians living in low income. And I believe it was also used as a basis for payments to participants in the Ontario pilot. So there are other measures that are often mentioned, like the low income cutoff and the market basket measure. So I'm wondering, in your opinion and for all the panelists, which of these measures would be best suited for designing a program for guaranteed basic income, and why? Yeah, for all, both can answer. Yeah.
I think that's one of the parameters that can be determined in terms of the design of a project. I'm not a person who's very much committed to one measure over another. I think we want to see improvement over time. But I think that there are, depending on data availability and so on, I think that there are various ways that we can approach the problem. I don't have a firmer answer than that.
I would like to go back to the framework problem raised by Senator Wu, I think this is exactly what this framework needs to figure out. What metrics are we using, and our provinces reporting back to the Parliament over time? I agree with Evelyn that there shouldn't be one single metric, because that will never work over the long run. Instead, I'd encourage a use of multiple metrics, assessing, productivity, well-being, cost savings in those domains.
I'm just going to, what they said.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator McAdam. Sénateur Dagenet, pour une question, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, ma question.
Thank you. My question is for Ms. Wynne. Ms. Wynne, as you were Premier of Ontario, you will have no difficulty, I'm sure, in reaching an agreement amongst provinces for a single program. You have been Premier, but Senator Forêt referred to this. When I asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer, do you think that we should start, first of all, by reaching agreements with the provinces on what they want or what they would be willing to abandon as a provincial program before the federal government moves on this guaranteed basic income? Don't you think that that would be a more concrete way of approaching the issue? And if you say yes, how many years and how long would it take to work your way through such an agreement?
Sorry?
Are you saying there's no interpretation?
Anyway, I don't. So you're asking me about were you asking me about the amount of time you think we would need to bring the provinces, and would the provinces be prepared to work with the federal government?
That's right, because I'm sure you understand the situation to have an agreement between the province and federal.
Yes, of course. And so I can't say how much time. I don't know what that would look like, but I do believe that as part of this framework, there would need to be this discussion, Senator. How would we bring provinces on? What would be the exchange? I would hope that at the Council of the Federation, where the premiers sit, that there would be the ability to build consensus. Having sat at that table, it can be a very nonpartisan conversation. And I think if the federal government were willing to take part in a discussion on the reduction of poverty through a basic income program, I think there would be a willingness to engage in that conversation. So I would be optimistic, if not completely confident, that it would happen immediately.
I understand I don't have any more time, Mr. Chairman. Do you have another question? Well, I'll go ahead then. Now, listen, I'll go quickly. Do you believe that the federal government is best placed, best equipped to manage a program like a basic income?
Right level of government to be, I believe, as I said before, I think that we are dealing with national crises. And I think that it's very important that we have a national conversation and that we recognize that this is not about one province or another or one region or another. There are consistent issues across the country that people are dealing with, and every province needs to be part of this conversation. So yes, I do believe that the federal government can provide the catalyst for that conversation.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Première Ministre. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Wynne.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Honorable Senators, our second panel, and to the witnesses, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, and your visions with the Finance Committee. And on this, Honorable Senators, our next meeting, but before, I would like to remind the witnesses that we have agreed that you would send some answers in writing through the clerk, please, and that, if possible, before the end of the day on Tuesday, October 21st, 2023. Pardon? And before closing, the Deputy Chair would have a question or a comment. Deputy Chair, Senator Forêt.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think that we only have one meeting on this subject. And so I ask myself, given that it's impossible to really have dealt fully with the issue, would we not be able to have an order of reference from the Senate that would allow us to have, at the very least, the possibility of having a pilot project to be able to measure the impact of such a guaranteed income? Would that be something that we would be able to perhaps suggest to our analysts? That is, that we could have that in a report to the Senate. I can assure our colleague, our Vice Chair, that it will be item number 1 at our next meeting with the steering committee. Oh, I trust you absolutely. That being said,
to thank also the entire support team of the Finance Committee, those in the forefront and also of the room and also behind the scenes who are not visible. Thank you for your hard work and your contribution. It makes our job as senators certainly enlightening in order to share the information to the public and Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And on this, je déclare maintenant la séance, the meeting is now adjourned, honorable senators.